7 million American men in their prime working years have vanished from the workforce. Not fired, not laid off. They just stopped showing up. And what's happening, because of it, should concern us all. This isn't about a few guys taking a break or early retirement. This is a mass exodus happening in real time. These men aren't protesting in the streets or making demands. They're doing something far more powerful. They're quietly subtracting themselves from the social math. And now, after decades of ignoring them, society is finally starting to panic, because when millions of men disappear, the consequences don't stay invisible for long. The cracks are showing everywhere, in our economy, in our communities, and in the very foundation of how our society functions. This is the story of the invisible men, why they vanished, and why their absence is about to change everything. Section 1. The invisible men. Who they are and the evidence. So who are these invisible men? They're not a fringe group. They're everywhere, hiding in plain sight. They're the guy who used to work at the plant before it closed. The young man who dropped out of community college because he couldn't see the point. The middle-aged father who gave up looking for work after 2 years of rejection. They span every age, every background, every corner of the country, but they share one thing. They've stopped participating in the systems that used to define a man's place in society, and the data is staggering. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, roughly 7 million men between the ages of 25 and 54, what economists call prime working age, are currently not in the labor force. They're not unemployed in the traditional sense. They're not looking for work at all. They've simply checked out. In 1950, nearly 98% of men in this age group were working or actively seeking work. Today, according to Federal Reserve data, that number has dropped to around 89%. That's an 11% decline, and it represents millions of men who have walked away. The education system is seeing the same pattern. Pew Research reports that for every 100 men enrolled in college today, there are 132 women. That's not a small gap, that's a chasm. Since 2011, according to the National Student Clearinghouse, more than 1 million fewer men are enrolled in higher education compared to a decade ago. Even as the population has grown, men aren't just lagging behind, they're disappearing from campuses entirely. And it's not just work and school, the retreat extends into family and relationships. US Census data shows that men in the bottom half of the income distribution are far less likely to get married or form stable long-term partnerships than they were 40 years ago. The marriage rate for men without a college degree has collapsed. In many communities, a generation of men is growing up disconnected, not just from work, but from the anchors of family and community that used to give life structure and meaning. This isn't a blip, this is a fundamental shift. These men aren't temporarily down on their luck. They've made a choice, conscious or not, to stop playing a game they feel they can no longer win. They've become invisible by design, fading into the background of a society that for a long time didn't even notice they were gone. But now, the absence is impossible to ignore. Section 2. The root causes. Why is this happening? So why is this great withdrawal happening right now? It wasn't one single thing, but a perfect storm created by three powerful forces hitting all at once: a massive economic shift, a jarring cultural whiplash, and a devastating psychological toll. First, the economic tsunami. For most of the 20th century, a guy could graduate high school, get a union job at the local factory or in a skilled trade, and be pretty confident he could have a stable career and support a family. That deal has been taken apart piece by piece. The collapse of manufacturing from automation and outsourcing was a body blow to traditional male jobs. And these weren't just jobs, they were identities. They gave men respect and a steady paycheck. So what replaced them? For men without a college degree, the new jobs are often in the service sector or the gig economy, unstable, lower paying, and with few if any benefits. According to Economic Policy Institute analysis, real wages for men without a 4-year degree have fallen dramatically since the 1970s and 1980s. This isn't just about buying power, it's about the value of the work itself. When you feel like society no longer values your labor enough to pay you a living wage, your motivation to even show up craters. It's not just that the jobs left, it's that the promise society made to these men, work hard and you'll have a life of dignity, was broken. The second force is cultural whiplash. While the economy was transforming, so were our social rules. The rise of women in the workforce and in college is without a doubt one of the great success stories of our time. But this rapid change left a lot of men disoriented. The traditional male role of sole provider, which anchored male identity for centuries, has been shaken to its core. According to Pew Research, today 40% of households have a woman as the main breadwinner, a fourfold increase in just a few decades. That's not a bad thing, but it has left many men asking, what's my role now? The old script is gone, and no one handed them a new one. We celebrate, as we should, when women break into male-dominated fields, but men who think about entering female-dominated fields like nursing or teaching can face stigma. Many are left feeling like extras in their own lives, their struggles ignored in a culture focused on other stories. This can lead to a deep sense of purposelessness, a feeling that the world is moving on and it doesn't really care if they're left behind. And that brings us to the third and maybe most destructive force, the psychological toll. Cut off from work and a clear social role, millions of men are falling into a silent epidemic of loneliness, anxiety and despair. Men are notoriously bad at asking for help with mental health, often because of that old stigma that says vulnerability is weakness, so they struggle alone in silence. This isolation is a breeding ground for what economists Anne Case and Angus Deaton call deaths of despair. This is the horrifying rise in death rates among men from suicide, drug overdoses, and alcohol-related disease. According to the CDC, men are nearly 4 times more likely than women to die by suicide. They account for over 70% of opioid overdose deaths in many areas. This isn't just a health crisis, it's the tragic final act of a crisis of meaning. Research shows that long-term unemployment is brutal for anyone's mental health, but it is uniquely scarring for men whose identities are often so wrapped up in their work. When you mix a broken economic promise with a confusing cultural map and a silent mental health crisis, you get this perfect storm. You get millions of men who are not just unemployed, but completely adrift. They aren't just invisible to society, many are starting to feel invisible to themselves. We're getting into a topic that affects the very foundation of our society, and if this is hitting home, it's because you see the truth in it. This conversation is too important to keep in the dark. To help us keep asking these tough questions, take a second to subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support is what lets us do this work. And now, let's look at what happens when this quiet crisis starts to boil over. Section 3. The domino effect. The consequences society ignores. The withdrawal of millions of men isn't a small problem that only affects them. It's a crack in the foundation that threatens to bring the whole building down. The consequences are now getting too big to ignore, and this is why the panic is starting to set in. We're seeing the fallout in 2 huge ways, in our economy and in our social fabric. First, the economic fallout. This is where the panic is most obvious. We are facing a massive skilled labour shortage. Industries like construction, manufacturing and trucking are desperate for workers. According to the Associated General Contractors of America, the construction industry alone was short more than 500,000 workers in 2024. These are the exact jobs traditionally filled by the men who are now vanishing from the workforce. An older generation is retiring, and there aren't enough young men to take their place. This has real consequences for all of us. When roads and bridges don't get built because there aren't enough welders or electricians, it slows down the whole economy. It drives up prices, fuels inflation, and makes our country less productive. The Federal Reserve has raised the alarm on this, and some economic estimates suggest the US economy could be losing up to $1 trillion a year in lost potential. $1 trillion. That's not a rounding error, it's a gaping hole in our economy, left by the absence of these supposedly invisible men. It also puts a huge strain on our social safety nets. Men who aren't working, aren't paying taxes, and many may end up on disability or other programs, increasing the burden on the whole system. But the economic cost might be nothing compared to the social fracture. The withdrawal of men is tearing at the seams of our communities. Historically, a society with a large number of disengaged, single and idle young men is a society prone to instability. The impact on the family is immediate. As we saw, men on the economic margins are less likely to get married or form stable partnerships. This directly feeds into declining marriage rates and a rise in single-parent households, which research links to higher child poverty rates. The breakdown of the family isn't a private issue, it's a public one, with far-reaching consequences. This retreat also leaves a vacuum in our communities. Men who are plugged into work and family are also more likely to be the guys who coach Little League, volunteer and form the backbone of local groups. When they pull back, community life withers. Even more concerning, this feeling of being left behind makes these men vulnerable. They feel like mainstream institutions don't listen to them, so they start listening to fringe voices that promise to restore their lost sense of purpose and masculinity. The rise of the angry, divisive manosphere online is a direct symptom of this crisis. It's what a desperate search for answers looks like in a world that doesn't seem to offer any. We are creating a large, disconnected and increasingly frustrated group of people, and that is a very unstable foundation to build a future on. Section 4. The real faces of the crisis. Communities in collapse. But let's stop talking in abstractions for a moment. Let's look at what this actually looks like on the ground, in real communities across America. Because the invisible men crisis isn't just a collection of statistics, it's destroying real places and real lives. Drive through the Rust Belt towns in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and you'll see the physical evidence everywhere. Factories that once employed thousands now sit empty, windows broken, weeds growing through cracked parking lots. In these communities, according to research from the Brookings Institution, male labor force participation has fallen below 80% in some counties. That means 1 in 5 men of working age has simply stopped trying. The local diner closes because there aren't enough customers. The high school can't field a football team because too many young men have dropped out or moved away. These aren't just economic statistics, they're the death of a way of life. The infrastructure crisis is becoming impossible to ignore. The Associated Builders and Contractors estimates that the construction industry needs to attract nearly 650,000 additional workers on top of normal hiring just to meet demand. But here's the kicker. According to industry surveys, 88% of contractors report difficulty filling hourly craft positions. Projects are delayed by months or even years. The economic impact is staggering. Delayed infrastructure projects cost the US economy an estimated $10.8 billion annually in lost productivity and increased costs, and it's not just construction. The American Trucking Association reports a shortage of 80,000 truck drivers, with that number projected to reach 160,000 by 2030 if trends continue. Without trucks, store shelves go empty, supply chains break down, prices rise. The men who used to fill these roles, men who took pride in keeping America moving, are walking away, and we're all feeling the consequences. But the human cost is even more devastating. The loneliness epidemic among men has reached crisis levels. According to a 2021 Survey Center on American Life study, 15% of men report having no close friendships at all, triple the rate from 1990. These aren't just lonely guys sitting at home. These are men spiraling into depression, substance abuse and hopelessness with no one to turn to. In Appalachia and rural America, the opioid crisis has hit men particularly hard. Counties that lost the most manufacturing jobs saw the steepest increases in overdose deaths among men. According to research published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, the pattern is clear and brutal. When men lose their economic purpose, they often lose their will to live. In some small towns, the local funeral home is one of the few businesses still thriving. Emergency rooms report treating the same men over and over for overdoses, each time bringing them back from the edge, knowing there's no real support system waiting for them when they leave. These communities aren't just economically depressed, they're psychologically devastated. And here's what makes this even more tragic. Many of these men want to work, they want to contribute, but they've been rejected so many times, or they've watched their fathers and uncles get discarded by companies that no longer value loyalty, that they've simply given up. The social contract that said, if you work hard and play by the rules, you'll be okay, has been shredded, and once that trust is broken, it's incredibly hard to rebuild. The invisible men aren't invisible because they want to be. They're invisible because we stopped seeing them. And now entire communities are paying the price for our collective blindness. Section 5. Empowerment, not blame. Charting a path forward. So where do we go from here? It's easy to get stuck playing the blame game. Blaming men for checking out, or blaming society for changing, is a dead end. The only way forward is through empowerment, and that means we have to radically rethink our approach to masculinity, education, and work. First, we absolutely must fix the education and skills gap. The constant message that a 4-year degree is the only ticket to success has failed millions of young men. We need to rebrand the skilled trades and vocational training, not as a consolation prize, but as a respectable, high-demand and financially smart career path. That means bringing back shop class, funding vocational schools, and creating real apprenticeship programs that lead directly to good jobs. Germany's dual education system, which combines classroom learning with paid apprenticeships, has youth unemployment rates far below ours. We can learn from that. Investing in the skills our economy is screaming for. Welding, plumbing, electrical work, advanced manufacturing, HVAC, it gives men a straight line to a stable career and a renewed sense of competence. These aren't dead-end jobs. Skilled tradesmen can earn $60,000 or more annually, often without the crushing student debt that comes with a 4-year degree. We need to make this path visible and valued again. Second, we have to tackle the mental health crisis head-on. The stigma around men's mental health is a silent killer. We need to make it normal to talk about it and make support easy to get. That means putting mental health services in schools and workplaces, promoting telehealth options for privacy, and funding support groups where men can actually talk to each other. Organisations like the Men's Sheds movement, which started in Australia and is spreading globally, create spaces where men can work on projects together while naturally opening up about their struggles. It works because it doesn't force vulnerability. It creates an environment where it can happen organically. We need a cultural shift where taking care of your mental health is seen as a sign of strength, not weakness. Athletes and veterans speaking openly about their mental health struggles are helping to change this narrative. But we need more. We need it normalized in every workplace, every community center, every church and social organization. Third, we have to help build a new vision of masculine identity and purpose. The old model of the stoic lone wolf provider just doesn't fit the modern world. Empowering men isn't about turning back the clock. It's about giving them the tools and the permission to build new, meaningful identities. It means valuing their role as an engaged father, a committed partner, or a pillar of the community just as much as we value their paycheck. It means creating a culture where a man's worth isn't measured just by his salary, but by his character and his contribution to the world around him. This requires honest conversations about what healthy masculinity looks like in the 21st century. It's not about rejecting traditional masculine virtues like strength, courage, and responsibility. Those are valuable. It's about expanding the definition to include emotional intelligence, vulnerability, and adaptability. Men need role models who embody this balanced approach, not the toxic extremes they often see online. Finally, this all requires a change in policy and public conversation. We need policies that support working families and invest in the communities that have been hollowed out. Infrastructure investment isn't just about roads and bridges, it's about creating the kinds of jobs that give men purpose. Tax incentives for companies that invest in apprenticeship programs, support for community colleges that partner with local industries, revitalization programs for struggling towns that go beyond economic development to include mental health services and community building. But just as important, we need to change how we talk about men. We have to be smart enough to hold two ideas in our heads at once. We can and should continue to fight for women and minorities, while also acknowledging and addressing the very real crisis that millions of men are facing. Their struggle isn't a competing issue. It's tied to the health of our whole society. A society where men are failing is a society that is failing, period. This isn't about going back to some black and white version of the past. It's about building a future where every man, no matter his job or education, has a real shot at a life of purpose, dignity, and connection. Conclusion: the invisible men aren't a lost cause. They are a warning light on the dashboard of our society. Their quiet retreat from our schools, our jobs, and our communities is a symptom of a much deeper problem. For decades, we just assumed they'd be fine, that they'd always be there to build our cities, fix our cars, and keep the world moving. We took their participation for granted. Now we're starting to feel their absence. The panic that's slowly creeping into our boardrooms and government offices is a late recognition of a simple truth: we need them. A healthy society can't work when a huge part of its population is disconnected, disrespected, and in despair. Their problems are our problems. Their invisibility is a blind spot we can no longer afford. And here's what almost nobody realizes: this isn't just about saving men, it's about saving the social contract itself. When any group feels systematically excluded from opportunity and dignity, the entire system becomes unstable. The invisible men are showing us where our society is broken, and fixing it benefits everyone. The challenge isn't to force these men back into a world that broke its promise to them. It's to build a world where they have a reason to show up again, a world that values their work, supports their health, and gives them a sense of purpose. And the first step is the simplest and the hardest: to finally, truly see them. This is one of the most important conversations we can be having right now, and we need to have it together. What are your thoughts on this? Have you seen this happening in your community or in your own life? Are you one of these invisible men, or do you know someone who is? Share your perspective in the comments below. Let's talk this through, because finding a solution always starts with understanding. And if you found this valuable, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who needs to hear this. Thanks for watching.